Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I ended up in the pediatric ward when I was 15. Not because I was sick or injured, but because nobody knew what else to do with me. The meltdowns had been getting worse for months. My family doctor didn't have answers. My parents were exhausted. The school counselor suggested hospitalization might help figure things out. So there I was, admitted to a ward full of babies and confused nurses who clearly had no idea what to make of me. When they brought me to my room, I noticed how quiet everything was, except for the occasional cry from one of the infant patients down the hall. I was the only teenager on the floor, possibly the only kid over the age of 2. A few hours after I arrived, I wandered past the nurse's station. The door was open and I could see the patient board on the wall, rows of names with little notes beside them. Most said things like respiratory distress or feeding issues. Mine just said out of control. Not a diagnosis, not a condition, just 3 words that basically meant everyone had given up trying to understand what was happening to me. The nurses were polite enough at first, but I could tell they didn't really get why I was there. One of them asked if I needed anything, and I said I was fine. I wasn't fine. I was terrified and confused and felt completely abandoned, but saying that out loud felt impossible. Mealtimes were the worst. They'd bring trays 3 times a day, and I noticed right away the dessert was always fruit or jello, never anything chocolate. I asked about it on the second day. The nurse apologized and told me I couldn't have chocolate because it was on my restrictions list. I asked why. She explained it was listed as an allergy right there on my chart. I didn't have a chocolate allergy. I'd eaten chocolate my whole life without any problems, but I was too tired to argue, and honestly, I figured maybe they knew something I didn't. Maybe the doctor had found something in my blood work. It wasn't until day 3 that I saw the meal slip sitting on the counter when a nurse was checking something. Right there in the allergy section, it said chocolate in someone's handwriting. Not typed, handwritten, like someone had just added it. That's when I understood. They thought sugar was making me act out or whatever they were calling it. They'd invented an allergy to justify keeping sweets away from me. The timing was awful too because I was dealing with the worst PMS I'd ever experienced. I'd been on birth control to regulate my periods, but they'd made me stop taking it when I was admitted. Something about wanting to see my baseline behavior without medication. All I wanted was chocolate. Just 1 piece. But apparently that was too much to ask. The breaking point came on day 5. I'd been holding everything together as best I could, but the walls were closing in. My mom hadn't visited since dropping me off. My dad called once, but the conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes. I felt completely abandoned by everyone who was supposed to care about me. I started screaming. Not at anyone specifically, just screaming because the pressure inside my chest had to go somewhere. A nurse burst into my room about 30 seconds later. She told me I needed to stop right now because I was scaring the babies. I told her I was scaring myself too. She said that wasn't an excuse and reminded me this was a pediatric ward with sick infants who needed rest. I shot back that I was sick too and that's why I was there. She warned me that I was disturbing other patients and if I couldn't control myself they'd have to restrain me. She left after that and I sat there shaking. Nobody was listening. Nobody cared that I was falling apart. They just wanted me to be quiet and stop bothering them. The admissions blurred together after that first one. I went home, came back a few weeks later, went home again. 3rd admission, 4th admission. Each time felt the same. Isolation, confusion, nurses who treated me like an inconvenience. But something changed during the 4th stay. They started giving me chocolate with meals. No explanation, no apology for the made-up allergy. It just appeared on my tray one day, like it had always been allowed. And then one of the nurses made an observation that should have been obvious from day 1. She mentioned she'd noticed something. Every time I was admitted to the ward, I was on my period. I confirmed that was true and explained it wouldn't be happening if they'd let me keep taking the pill. She seemed confused, so I clarified. I told her I took birth control continuously with no breaks, exactly how my doctor prescribed it. but the staff kept making me stop when I was admitted, which caused my period to start up again. She just said, oh, like she'd finally connected dots that should have been connected months ago. A whole ward full of female nurses, and not one of them had considered that stopping birth control pills would cause breakthrough bleeding and hormonal chaos. They let me stay on the pill after that. The meltdowns didn't magically stop, but at least I wasn't dealing with surprise periods and PMS on top of everything else. I never got an apology for any of it. Not for the fake allergy, not for the yelling, not for treating me like a problem instead of a patient. Eventually, I aged out of the pediatric ward and stopped going back. Years later, I got my autism diagnosis, and everything from those hospital stays made a lot more sense. The sensory overload, the inability to communicate what I needed, the meltdowns that nobody understood. I wasn't out of control. I was autistic and overwhelmed in an environment that had no idea how to help me. But I still think about that patient board sometimes. All those babies with real diagnoses and then me, just out of control. I shared an apartment with my roommate. She was 25 and worked at some marketing firm. When we met through a housing app, she seemed normal enough. Before we signed the lease, I sat her down at a coffee shop and laid out my boundaries. I told her straight up that I was really private about my stuff. My journals, my electronics, and especially my skincare. I spent a lot on it and needed it to last. She jumped in immediately and said she totally got it. She claimed she hated when people touched her things too. I asked if we were on the same page. She said absolutely. Lies. All lies. The first month was fine. We split bills evenly, kept the common areas clean, stayed out of each other's way. But then small things started happening. I'd come home and notice my makeup brushes weren't in the same position I left them. My phone charger would vanish from my nightstand, only to reappear 2 days later on the kitchen counter. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then it got worse. One morning I reached for my vitamin C serum. The bottle felt light, way too light. I'd only used it maybe 3 times since buying it 2 weeks ago. Now it was half empty. I checked my moisturizer. Same thing. My expensive eye cream that was supposed to last 3 months, almost gone in 5 weeks. I did the math in my head. There was no way I'd used that much product. Impossible. I waited until that evening when she got home from work. I asked if we could talk for a second. She said sure and asked what was up. I asked if she'd been using any of my skincare stuff. She looked confused and asked why she would do that. I explained that my bottles were emptying way faster than they should be. She suggested maybe I was using more than I thought. I told her I wasn't. She shrugged and said she hadn't touched anything. She looked right at me when she said it. Didn't even blink. I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. 2 weeks later, I came home early from work because of a migraine. I opened the apartment door as quietly as possible, not wanting to make the headache worse with noise. That's when I heard movement in my bedroom. My bedroom, the door was cracked open. I walked closer and peeked inside. She was standing at my dresser. My makeup bag was open in front of her. She had my eyeliner in one hand and was applying it in my mirror like she owned the place. I asked what she was doing. She jumped and spun around, but then her face relaxed into this casual smile. She said hey and mentioned I was home early. I repeated that it was my stuff. She told me to chill and said we were roomies, so it was basically shared stuff. I said no, it wasn't. She told me not to be dramatic. I reminded her that she'd promised not to touch my things. She brushed it off and said it was just makeup, adding that I had so much of it anyway. That's when I noticed something else. My closet door was open, and the dress hanging on the outside hook, the navy blue one with the tiny white flowers, wasn't hung up the way I always hung it. My mom gave me that dress 3 years ago right before she died. It was one of the last gifts she ever bought me. I only wore it on special occasions. I kept it pristine. I walked over and grabbed it off the hook. It was wrinkled, badly, and when I lifted it to my nose, I smelled cologne. Men's cologne. I asked if she'd worn it. She seemed confused at first. I asked again about the dress if she'd worn it. She admitted she had just once for a date last weekend. I told her she'd worn my mother's dress on a date without even asking me. She said I wasn't home and she needed something nice to wear. I told her to get out of my room. She said I was being insane. I said it again. Out. She rolled her eyes and left, taking her sweet time about it. I locked the door behind her and sat on my bed, holding that dress and trying not to cry. The next day I went to the hardware store and bought a lock. A simple one that I could install myself without damaging the door too much. It took me 20 minutes to put it on. When she got home that night, she noticed immediately. She asked if I was serious. I said very. She asked if I'd actually put a lock on my door. I confirmed that I had. She said it was insulting and that I was treating her like some kind of criminal. I told her that if she wanted trust, she should stop going through my things. She called the whole thing insane and said we lived together. She accused me of ruining the vibe of our home. I reminded her that the vibe was already ruined when she went through my closet and wore my dead mom's dress without asking. She asked if I was ever going to let that go. I said no, I wasn't. She's been cold ever since. Won't talk to me unless absolutely necessary. Slams doors. Leaves her dishes in the sink just to be petty. I don't care. Yesterday, one of our mutual friends texted me. She said my roommate had told her about the lock thing and asked if I thought I'd overreacted a little. She said it was just girl stuff and that roommates share things. I typed back that not without permission, they don't. She replied that she thought I was making a bigger deal out of this than it needed to be. I didn't respond after that. This morning I woke up to the sound of her vacuuming at 7 in the morning, right outside my door, on a Saturday. I turned over, pulled my pillow over my head, and smiled. My stuff is locked up, my boundaries are set, and she can vacuum all she wants. I thought my sister would never leave, not because she didn't want to, but because he made her believe she couldn't. For years, she put up with the drinking, the late nights that smelled like cheap perfume, the gaslighting that made her question her own memory. When she finally packed her things and moved out, I felt like I could breathe again. My husband had been friends with my brother-in-law since college. They used to watch football together, go fishing, normal guy stuff. But even he started pulling away once the separation started. My brother-in-law turned into someone we didn't recognize. Every conversation became a rant about how my sister was taking everything from him, how she was being unreasonable, how he was the real victim. He dragged out every part of the divorce process, missed deadlines, ignored lawyers. It was exhausting just watching it from the sidelines. So when he called me last Tuesday asking if he could bring his new girlfriend over for dinner, I almost dropped the phone. I asked him what he meant by girlfriend. He explained that he'd been seeing someone and it was getting pretty serious. When I asked how long they'd been together, he said about a month, then added that when you know, you know. He wanted us to meet her, maybe this weekend. I paused, trying to find the right words. It wasn't just that it felt rushed, it felt wrong. My sister was still trying to figure out how to explain the divorce to her kids. She was living in a tiny apartment because she couldn't afford anything better yet. And he wanted me to sit down and play happy family with someone he'd been dating for 4 weeks. I told him I didn't think it was a good idea. He asked why, sounding confused and a bit defensive. I explained that it felt too soon and that, honestly, it would be disrespectful to my sister. That set him off. He accused me of being childish and controlling. He said I was trying to sabotage his happiness because I couldn't stand seeing him move on. I tried to explain that I wasn't doing any of that, that I was just saying no to dinner at my house. He called me immature and hung up. I told my husband about it that night, and he just shook his head. We both agreed it was ridiculous, but I figured that was the end of it. I was very wrong. The next day, I was folding laundry in the living room while my daughter played with blocks on the floor. Then someone started pounding on the front door. Not knocking, pounding. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her 20s, blonde hair pulled back tight, arms crossed like she was ready for war. I opened the door halfway and asked if I could help her. She immediately told me I could stop ruining her relationship. I asked what she meant, genuinely confused. She snapped that I knew exactly what she was talking about, that I'd told him she couldn't come over, and that I'd excluded her. She demanded to know who I thought I was. It clicked. This was the girlfriend. I told her I didn't know her and she wasn't invited here. I said she needed to leave and she refused. She said I needed to accept her because she was going to be around for a long time. She declared that this family was going to know her whether I liked it or not. Then she shoved past me into the house, actually pushed me aside and walked right in. My daughter started crying. I spun around trying to process what just happened. I told her to get out of my house right now or I was calling the police. She yelled at me to go ahead and call them. She said they'd see that I was the problem, not her. She was screaming now, waving her arms around. She knocked a lamp off the side table. It chattered on the floor and my daughter cried harder. My husband came running in from the backyard and demanded to know what was going on. The woman turned on him, saying now the husband shows up. She told him he could tell his wife to stop acting like she owned the world. Then she said something that made my blood boil. She claimed that women like my sister deserve to lose their husbands when they couldn't keep them happy. My husband pulled out his phone and called 911. The woman's face went pale. She turned and tried to head for the door, but she was still yelling as she went. She kept screaming that this was insane, that we were all insane. Before she could get outside, our neighbor from across the street appeared on the porch. He held up his phone and announced that he'd gotten the whole thing on video. He said he saw her banging on the door, forcing her way in, all of it. The girlfriend froze. The police showed up maybe 6 minutes later. My husband explained everything. The neighbors showed them the video. It was clear as day, her screaming, shoving her way inside, knocking things over, yelling about my sister. The officers asked her to step outside. She tried to act calm suddenly, like she'd been the reasonable one the whole time. But the video didn't lie. They arrested her for trespassing and disorderly conduct. She screamed the entire way to the patrol car about how we were all ganging up on her. About an hour later, my brother-in-law showed up. He didn't even ask if we were okay. Just started yelling about how I escalated everything, how I destroyed his chance at happiness, how I targeted his girlfriend for no reason. My husband cut him off and told him that she broke into our house and terrorized our kid. He said that wasn't targeting. That was what happens when you break the law. My brother-in-law shot back that she wouldn't have come here if I'd just been reasonable in the first place. I didn't even respond. I shut the door in his face. Later that night, I called my sister and told her everything. I was worried it might upset her, but instead she laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. She said he'd picked a real winner this time. I told her I was sorry she was tied to him through the kids. She told me not to be, that this just made the divorce easier. She said his lawyer was going to love hearing about this. The charges stuck. The girlfriend ended up with a court date, and my brother-in-law stopped speaking to us entirely. My sister said he broke up with a girlfriend 2 weeks later. I replaced the lamp. My daughter forgot about it by the next day, and for the first time in a long time, my sister sounded free. I pushed through the break room door at 6:45 a.m. ready to start my morning shift at the clinic. The first person I saw was my supervisor, who gave me this weird look. He asked why I came in when he thought I'd switched to nights this week. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about and that I was on my regular schedule. He said that was strange because my coworker told him yesterday that we'd worked it out. Before I could respond, 2 of the nurses walked past. They asked why I wasn't sleeping since night shift started at 8 p.m., not a.m. They both laughed like it was some inside joke I was supposed to be in on. I felt my stomach drop. I asked if someone could please tell me what was going on. That's when my coworker breezed in through the side door, coffee in hand, looking way too cheerful for someone who apparently had plans I knew nothing about. She saw me and said she texted me like 3 times last night. I told her I didn't get any texts from her. She brushed that off and thanked me for covering nights this week, saying I was literally saving her life right now. I asked what she was talking about because I never agreed to cover anything. Her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. She told me not to do this because she'd already told everyone we switched. She explained she booked a trip to Miami with her boyfriend and the flights were super cheap, but only if they left today. I told her that sounded like her problem, not mine. I had my own life and my own schedule. She protested that she'd already bought the tickets and they were non-refundable. I said then she should have asked me first before buying anything. The supervisor cleared his throat and asked for clarification about whether I'd actually agreed to switch shifts. I told him absolutely not, and that she never even asked me. My co-worker's face went red. She set her coffee down hard on the counter. She said this was ridiculous and insisted she'd told me about the trip. I said no, she didn't. The last time we talked was Monday, and she complained about being tired. She said nothing about Miami or switching shifts. She claimed she meant to ask me and then just assumed it would be fine because I was always so flexible. I asked if she seriously assumed I'd drop everything and completely change my schedule for a week because she made impulsive vacation plans. She got defensive and said it wasn't impulsive, that she'd been wanting to go for months. I pointed out that meant she'd had months to properly request time off through the actual system instead of lying to everyone that I agreed to cover for her. The supervisor pulled out his tablet and started scrolling. He confirmed there was no formal shift change request submitted. He only approved this because she said we'd worked it out privately and just needed it logged. My co-worker grabbed her phone and started typing frantically. She told me she was texting me right now asking if I'd please take her night shifts this week. I said no. She accused me of being selfish and asked if I knew how much those tickets cost. I told her I didn't care. She bought them without securing coverage first, and that was on her. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this to her. Everyone already thought we switched, and now she looked bad. I told her she should look bad. She lied to everyone, including our supervisor. She tried to manipulate the schedule and force me into nights without my consent. She turned to the supervisor with tears welling up in her eyes, the fake kind that don't actually fall. She asked if he could just make me do it, since it was only for 5 days. The supervisor said that wasn't how this worked. If I didn't agree to switch, I didn't agree. She'd need to either cancel her trip or find someone else who was actually willing to cover. She protested that she left in 6 hours. He repeated that this was a problem she created, and he suggested she start making some phone calls. She turned back to me and tried a different approach. She said she'd pay me $200 to cover the shifts. I told her no amount of money would make me change my answer. This wasn't about money, it was about the fact that she lied and tried to trap me into a situation without my permission. She started scrolling through her phone trying to call other co-workers right there in the break room. The first person she called didn't answer. The second person answered but said they already had plans they couldn't change. The third person told her flat out that they'd heard what she did and weren't interested in helping her. She hung up and tried 2 more people with the same results. My co-worker grabbed her bag and walked toward the door, but not before turning back to glare at me. She told me thanks for nothing and said she hoped I was happy, ruining her vacation. I said I didn't ruin anything. She ruined it herself by not following proper procedures and lying to people. She slammed the door on her way out. The supervisor shook his head. He told me that for what it's worth, he should have verified with me directly before approving anything. That was his fault. I said it was fine but suggested he maybe require both people to sign off next time. He agreed absolutely and told me he was writing her up for this. Falsifying schedule changes was serious. He also mentioned this would go in her file and could affect her ability to request time off in the future. The rest of the morning, people kept coming up to me asking what happened. My coworker had told quite the story about how generous I was being and how she owed me big time. When the truth came out, everyone seemed pretty annoyed with her. One of the nurses mentioned that my coworker had been bragging about the Miami trip for the past 2 days. She'd been showing everyone photos of the resort and talking about the beach. Never once did she mention that she hadn't actually gotten approval for time off. Around lunchtime, I heard through the grapevine that she couldn't find anyone to cover on such short notice. She tried calling in sick, but the supervisor told her if she did that without a doctor's note while he knew she was actually in Miami, it would be grounds for termination. She ended up having to cancel the trip, lost about $400 on the flights. Her boyfriend apparently wasn't happy about it either. Someone said they saw her crying in her car in the parking lot around 1 p.m. When she came back the next day, she wouldn't even look at me. Just sulked around the clinic like a storm cloud. She snapped at patients and gave short answers to anyone who tried to talk to her. A few people tried to sympathize with her, but most seemed to think she'd brought it on herself. The supervisor had to pull her aside at one point and tell her to adjust her attitude or go home. She straightened up after that, but still refused to acknowledge my existence. A week later, another co-worker approached me privately. They told me they wanted to thank me for standing my ground. She tried to pull something similar with them 2 months ago. She told everyone they agreed to work Christmas Eve when they definitely didn't. They ended up just doing it because they felt pressured. It was nice to see someone actually call her out. They also mentioned that she'd tried the same thing last year with someone who no longer worked there. That person had switched shifts with her for a vacation, and then my co-worker never returned the favor when they needed coverage. Turns out she'd been doing this to people for a while, just banking on them being too uncomfortable to make a scene. The supervisor started requiring written confirmation from both parties for any shift changes after that. He sent out an email to the whole clinic explaining the new policy. My co-worker tried to act like it wasn't because of her, but everyone knew. She became a lot quieter after that whole situation. Still worked at the clinic but never tried pulling anything like that again, at least not that I heard about. I met my husband in college when we were both broke students eating ramen most nights. He was the first person I knew who actually cooked real meals, and I remember being impressed when he made me breakfast one morning after we started dating. He pulled out this heavy cast iron skillet and made a tofu scramble with peppers, onions, and mushrooms. It smelled amazing. He told me his mom taught him to make it, and it was his comfort food. I thought it was sweet. That was 11 years ago. Fast forward to now and I'm 7 months pregnant, working from home in a house we just bought. The house is beautiful in theory, built in 1923 with original hardwood floors and crown molding. But the ventilation is awful. The kitchen has one of those old range hoods that doesn't actually vent outside. It just blows the air around in circles. Our landlord at the old apartment had installed a proper exhaust fan, so I never realized how much we relied on it. The pregnancy has made everything worse. I have morning sickness that refuses to stay in the first trimester like it's supposed to. My doctor says some women just deal with it the whole time. Lucky me. Certain smells trigger it instantly. Burnt oil is at the top of that list. My husband still makes his tofu scramble every single morning. Same skillet, same recipe, same time. Around 7:30 I hear him in the kitchen, and my stomach starts churning before I even smell anything. The problem started maybe 3 years ago. He got promoted to a management position, and suddenly he had a million things on his mind. He'd start cooking, then wander off to check his email or think about some project. He'd insist the burner was off or barely on, but I could smell it. That distinct, acrid smell of oil heating too long in cast iron. Sometimes there was visible smoke. I mentioned it a few times back then gently. He'd apologize and say he'd be more careful. Things would improve for a week, then slide back. I even bought him a timer once, thinking that would help. He used it for about 3 days before it ended up in a drawer somewhere. Now with the pregnancy in this house, it's unbearable. This morning was the final straw. I had a video meeting at 8. Important one with a client I've been trying to land for months. I was in my office with the door closed, trying to look professional and not like I'd barely kept down my breakfast. Around 7:45 the smell hit me. Burnt oil, smoke, that awful chemical tang when a cast iron pan gets too hot. It seeped under my door and filled the room. My eyes watered. My throat tightened. I could feel my stomach starting to rebel. I was on camera. I couldn't leave. I couldn't cough. I sat there, forcing myself to breathe shallowly through my mouth, trying to focus on what the client was saying about their marketing needs. The smoke got thicker. I could see it now, a haze in the air catching the morning light from my window. Behind me on the video, I'm sure they could see it too. I made it through the meeting. Barely. The second I disconnected, I ran to the bathroom and threw up. When I came out, my husband was at the kitchen table eating his scramble, scrolling through his phone. The kitchen reeked. The living room reeked. My office still had smoke in it. I opened every window I could find even though it was cold outside. I told him we needed to talk about his breakfast. He greeted me sarcastically, asking if I could at least say good morning first. I said I was serious and explained that I'd just thrown up because of the smoke from his cooking. He brushed it off, claiming there wasn't that much smoke and that he'd been watching the pan. I pointed out that he definitely wasn't watching it because he'd left it on the stove and walked away. He insisted he'd had it on low and everything was fine. I told him it wasn't fine. My office had filled with smoke and I could barely breathe during my meeting. The client probably saw the smoke on camera. He said I was being dramatic and that the morning sickness was making me sensitive to smells. He claimed it wasn't actually that bad. I stared at him. He genuinely believed this. He took another bite of his scramble completely calm. I told him I needed him to stop making breakfast like this or to make it outside instead. He asked if I was serious about the outside suggestion, pointing out it was 40 degrees. I said then he should stop making it entirely. He put his fork down and looked at me like I'd suggested. He stopped breathing. He reminded me that this was what he ate for breakfast, that he'd made it every day for 15 years, since before he even met me. I shot back that for the last 3 years he'd been burning it because he couldn't stay in the kitchen while it cooked. He denied burning it at all. I insisted that yes, he did burn it every single day. It smelled terrible. And right now that smell made me sick. Literally sick. He asked if I was saying he should just stop eating breakfast because I was pregnant. I clarified that I was asking him to either pay attention while he cooked so it wouldn't burn, or find a different solution. Get a hot plate and cook on the porch. Make something else. Eat cereal. Make overnight oats. Buy a breakfast sandwich on his way to work. I didn't care, but I couldn't keep dealing with smoke in the house every morning. He said the ventilation in this house wasn't his fault. I agreed but pointed out that walking away from a hot pan was his fault. The burnt smell was his fault. The smoke was his fault. He claimed he barely left it for a minute. I told him he'd left it long enough for my entire office to fill with smoke. He called that an exaggeration. I asked him to come look at my office then. He refused. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab his precious cast iron skillet and throw it in the yard. Instead, I walked away before I said something I'd regret. I spent the rest of the morning airing out the house. That afternoon, I ordered a camping stove and a small propane tank online. Cost me $68 with shipping. When it arrived 2 days later, I set it up on our covered back porch with a folding table. I even put out a chair so he could sit if he wanted. The next morning at 7:25, I unplugged the kitchen stove. At 7:30, my husband came downstairs with his vegetables already chopped, ready to cook. He stared at the stove, then at me. He asked what I'd done. I explained that his new cooking station was on the back porch. Everything was set up and he could make his breakfast out there so I wouldn't have to smell it. The propane tank was full and the burner was ready to go. He complained that it was freezing outside. I suggested he wear a coat or stay in the kitchen and actually watch his food while it cooked. His choice. He said this was insane and that I couldn't just unplug the stove. I told him to watch me. We stood there in a standoff. Finally, he grabbed his ingredients and walked out to the porch. I heard him banging things around out there. The sliding door opened and closed harder than necessary, but no smoke came into the house. I plugged the stove back in after he left for work. That evening, we barely spoke. He ate leftovers for dinner in front of the television. I ate mine in the kitchen. But the next morning, he cooked outside again, and the morning after that. On the third day, it rained. He stood at the kitchen window looking at the porch, then at me. I said nothing. He grabbed his stuff and went outside anyway, cooking under the covered part of the porch while rain poured down around him. When he came back in, his scramble was perfect. Not burnt at all. No smoke. He didn't say a word about it. By the end of the week, something shifted. Yesterday, he finally stayed in the kitchen the entire time he cooked. No smoke, no burnt smell. He brought his laptop to the counter and checked his email while stirring. He set a timer on his phone. When it went off, he turned off the burner right away. This morning, he did the same thing. He even opened the window above the sink before he started cooking. We still haven't really resolved it. He thinks I'm being unreasonable and hormonal. I think he's being stubborn and inconsiderate. Last night, he mentioned that his co-worker said I was being controlling. I pointed out that his co-worker doesn't have to smell burnt oil while 7 months pregnant and trying to work. He went quiet after that. But my office doesn't smell like burnt oil anymore. I haven't thrown up from smoke in a week. The house doesn't reek every morning. My client emailed me yesterday to schedule another meeting. They didn't mention the smoke, but I'm pretty sure they noticed it. The camping stove is still set up on the porch, just in case. I'll take it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.